Thank you. Congratulations, John. And of course, Maria Laurino, that as you heard, is the author of the companion book to this series, The Italian Americans. We have devoted an evening to the presentation of Maria's book at Casa Italiana about a month ago, and I invite you to take a look at the video in which we talk expressly about the book, because it's a very illuminating experience, and especially invite you to read the book and buy the book. And of course, a great, very warm welcome to Gay Talese. And I would like to start with you, Mr. Talese. First of all, a legend in American literature, and to me he's also the most elegant man, probably in the city of New York, but definitely in the US. and I understand that also your style in which you carry yourself is part of your heritage, and you talk about it in at least one of your books. And my question is personal, and it's actually reminiscent of a previous book by Maria Laurino entitled, Were You Always an Italian? So the question is, how did you come to discover your heritage, and how is that reflected in your writing?
Should you wish to be first? No, go ahead.
All right, as the oldest, I'll be first. And indeed, old enough to have remembered, as your wonderful film evokes, John, I want to congratulate you so much for doing what brings us all such pride and a sense of history. And it's a sense of history that I lived through much of, because being born in 1932 and coming of age as a young man in the World War II years, and having a father born in Italy, trained as a tailor, very prideful in his craft, stitching with very determined fingers, always with a needle, never with a sewing machine, caring about craft more than the expediency of the machine. I learned through his example what pride one takes in work. But also, though, as he was the only member of his family to come to America, leaving two younger brothers and an older brother and a widowed mother in Calabria, and learning with the beginning of World War II and Italy being on the wrong side of that world, I learned as a troubled youth what it is like to be emotionally involved with two warring sides in wartime. My father's younger brothers both fought in Mussolini's army against the invading Allies, the Allies that moved across North Africa, into past Sicily, and up into the very region where my family traces its ancestry, that little town in Calabria on the mountains, near Catanzaro. And as a boy of 11 and 12 in this small town, born in Ocean City, New Jersey, very few Italians in that town, very few Catholics, and those Catholics were hostile Irish, which made me feel that I didn't belong where I was born. And I think I hope to think I'm probably the last of the Italian-American experience who was very familiar with the term Dego and WAP, because it was foisted upon me in my small Catholic parish, dominated by the Irish nuns and the priests, some of whom were born in Ireland. But I evoke this not so happy notion of my upbringing merely to bring to the present tense the fact that I'm a living memory of the dark ages of American-Italian experience on the small Jersey shore, somewhat south of Atlantic City. But I bring to my age, which is now 83, the memory of the triumphant years that followed. The war ended. The Italian nation was not looked upon so much in the 1950s as it had been in the 1940s as an adversarial country, affiliated with Nazi Germany, and the specter of Mussolini as a very negative and laughable, overweight man that while he got the trains to run on time, he got nothing else to really go on time. And we Italians had had enough of him in our time. And I saw in the 1960s and 70s, as I came of age to come to work in New York and have a job in the New York Times, how Italians that I wrote about, including the Cuomo family and the DiMaggio family, the Sinatra family, as a reporter, as a chronicler with that paper of record, I saw and met many of the people that John Maggio would illuminate with this great film that he's produced with Jeff Bieber and others that helped bring it to fruition as we see tonight. And so I'm in my very senior years, a very proud American of Italian extraction, and all of the good and bad that is reflected in this film. And I'm so happy that I lived long enough to see this film, because this is the first time I've actually seen a film that resonates with me as an accurate, passionate poem to the life we've all lived, all of us, sharing generation upon generation of memory. And I'm so happy to be here, and thank you for having me.
John, you have already received so many accolades for this film, but I think this is the most poetic one you've ever had so far, so you better make a note out of it. And the next question is for you, John. As we heard from Jeff, in his decision process of the person to whom entrust this project, and having to do with your heritage, and you're already an accomplished documentary maker, but this is very, very close to home for you, because you're an Italian American yourself. And I just want to know, in this process that lasted several years, what was the major discovery, the thing that you didn't know, that surprised you the most, that impressed you the most, and that got you more excited about this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel like there were lots of discoveries. There was the discovery of the lynching of 11 Italian Sicilians in New Orleans in 1896 I'd never heard about. There was the discovery of Arturo Giovannitti, a name I'd never heard growing up, only to learn he was this incredible poet, and really represented to me what Gay was talking about, with this sort of brought a kind of poetry and art to the labor movement in a way that I never really knew sort of existed. So it was a number of small discoveries like that, but what really struck me actually happened after I made the film, and I looked at it, and I actually watched all 4 hours, and I realized that there's an arc there. There's an incredible sort of the story of how one becomes an American. And to me, the real story here is it's kind of what gets lost in the bargain. All these small things along the way that add up, that make you an American, but also your culture gets pushed aside. Language. I mean, I wish to God I spoke Italian. I don't speak Italian. It was something.
You still have time.
I'm not, to speak it well. So it's things like that get lost for all ethnic groups: Irish, Jewish, Germans, everybody who comes here. Sort of, it's not so much a melting pot as it's a series of concessions. And looking at it across the 4 hours now, I realize it's okay now to go back, and we sort of talk about that in the film. What was once disparaged, the peasant food is now, always joke about, the gardoons and the burdocks that my dad picked out of the garden to eat, which were essentially weeds to me, are now $40 a plate at Babbo, And so we have in some weird way kind of come full circle. So for me, it wasn't necessarily one story, but it was the sum total of all the stories that we collected together that I realized this was a whole narrative that I now fit into, that I didn't know existed before I started.
Thank you, John. Before I ask my question to Maria, since you see 2 microphones there, and we wanted to have a little Q&A about the film that you've seen, and maybe a question also to Mr. Talese and Maria, if you want to start lining up in front of the microphones, and I'm going to alternate and give you the floor to ask your question, possibly brief and concise and to the point, after you say your name. Maria, you wrote this really beautiful book. But it's not the first time you talk about issues of identities, and especially Italian-American identity, and coming to terms with it. And it's a book, as we said, that is a companion to the documentary. So it's not the script of the documentary, but it follows the same structure that, as you saw already from the clip that we saw, I remind you that we saw 45 minutes out of the 4 hours that you will be able to see on your TV on February 17th and 24th. So the idea of working on these themes, and what impressed me about your book and also about the documentary is that it really gives a sense of a great diversity within the Italian-American experience. And every time we do an Italian-American program, there is somebody in the audience that says, this is not my story. And I think it is great that somebody stands up and says that, because there is no way to represent all the stories that are so different. And in this book and in this film, there are the saints and the sinners, there are the socialists, the anarchists and the fascists, and there are the gangsters and the law enforcement. I think really the greatness of this project is that to account for the diversity that is the richness of the Italian community. And I'm very curious to know about the collaboration between you and John. How did you go about working on two projects that are connected and at the same time have beautiful separate lives?
Well, it was a great fun to do. I always say that I was nostalgic about the project as I was working on it, because I knew how nostalgic I was going to be once it was over. So it was really just a wonderful gift that John Maggio gave to me, that he had created this wonderful documentary and then asked if I could write the companion book. And John was also so much fun to work with, as the entire team of ARC, and they were so generous giving me their material. So I just kind of, dove in and then went deeper, which was the idea that even PBS in 4 hours is not, it doesn't give you the same amount that you can say in a book. So I looked into each of the stories more deeply, and then added also some characters, added some other chapters, the Italian-American counterculture, the beat poets, all of these great parts of the culture that we weren't, able to see in the documentary.
And Maria, a question to you as a woman writer. We saw, and also as somebody like you who has always been involved in politics, these are your two lives. You're a writer and somebody who has been very active and also worked in politics, as we also heard from the mayor. Two women, Geraldine Ferrara was the first vice presidential candidate in a major ticket, and Nancy Pelosi was the first woman Speaker of the House, the two of them being Italian Americans. One would think that there is no problem of emancipation for Italian women. They are the most advanced in their path to complete equality as anybody else. Is that true, or is that a misleading?
No, I think that's a little misleading. We had an event last week at GW that was really wonderful, and Nancy Pelosi was there. And she talked about what it was like to be the first Speaker of the House, and how she was both the first woman and the first Italian American, and how it was such an accomplishment to be both. Because it's so difficult for Italian Americans to find a place for themselves in mainstream culture, and it has taken so long, and then to be a woman on top of that. What was so interesting for me about this whole process and thinking about this is, even at this table tonight, Gay is a second-generation Italian-American, I'm a third-generation Italian-American, John is a fourth-generation Italian-American, and we're all in some ways grappling with these same issues of identity and acceptance. And it's been a really long road, over 100 years after, our grandparents came here, or our parents came here, that there's still been such a struggle. And in seeing that, and sort of seeing the course of the history and how tumultuous that history has been, has made it difficult, and of course, particularly difficult for women.
Mr. Talese, another question for you. Since you of course, you're a very accomplished writer, but as you remember, you were a reporter for the New York Times, and you covered some of these great Italian Americans. Regarding the political allegiances of the Italian Americans, we heard the story of Giovannitti, the leaders of the strike, and then there is a sort of general assumption that it went all the way to the right, and little by little the Italian American community as a whole moved from a sort of more radical leftist tradition to more traditional conservative positions. Is that a fair assumption, or?
I believe that the conservatism that is fairly well documented within the Italian American community, no matter whether we're talking about northern cities or the other parts of the United States, I believe it traces its origins to the experience that I had in World War II as a young person. I believe my generation, the mid-20th century generation, were so insecure about our place in this country because, as I said, in my own family's situation, of my father having soldiers in a family wearing the wrong uniform. And I saw those photographs on my father's bureau in his bedroom snapshots of these brothers in these foreign, funny-looking Italian uniforms. The epaulets were wrong. The star was right. I mean, the whole, as a tailor's son, I knew what uniforms looked like. And this was wrong. And I think so many of us, of my